Hola, JSConf, Argentina. So I'm here to talk today about web modules. And you're kind of like, wow, what does that mean, right? Kind of a vague term. And you wouldn't be totally incorrect if you check on Google. It's not a totally unclaimed name. So what web modules am I here to talk about today? Not this one. Not the Python library either. And I mean, Java has a special place in all of our hearts, but I'm not talking about Java today either. This is JSConf, after all. So I'm talking about web modules, and specifically NPM modules designed for web browser usage. So at Automatic, we created this GitHub organization, Web Modules, and it's basically just a collection of common JS JavaScript modules that are intended for use in the browser. So if it's something generic that can also run in Node.js, it probably doesn't belong there. But we're also trying to maintain a certain level of coding standards and sort of like a development philosophy, if you will. At this point, they're kind of more guidelines because we're still working on complying 100% with these guidelines, these standards. But hopefully with some more time, we'll be able to get all that in. So basically, every module should be very small, very focused on one single task. Using Browserify for bundling. So you hopefully are all familiar with that. The GitHub repository name should match the NPM module name. And Readme markdown file is preferable, of course. And then unit tests, which might be a little bit more out of the norm for client-side code. And then with cloud testing enabled via Sauce Labs, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So small and focused, right? In a perfect world, you'd only export a single function, which we do by setting module exports to a function reference. And this helps enforce the small and focused design philosophy. And so one good example of that would be the node contains web module. And that's it in its entirety right there. So small, self-contained, focused. But this is basically actually a polyfill for the node contains W3C method with compatibility for Internet Explorer. But polyfills are also a great use case, well, like I just said, actually. But always try to just polyfill the smallest piece of the puzzle that you need to. And so another good example would be the progress event module, which implements the progress event constructor to return a progress object like you would use with XML HTTP request or things like that. But then, of course, support for things like Internet Explorer, which the unit test can verify. So if a module has an inverse of whatever it's doing, you should not implement that in the same repository. Do that in a new repository. Keep things isolated, keep things separated, keeps tests focused that way too. And so a good example of that is wrap range and unwrap range. So they're two different modules, but they do the inverse of each other, basically. So wrap range, I'm not showing it here, but you'd pass in a range and a DOM element name. And so then it would wrap the selection with a B node. So pretty simple. And then the inverse, unwrap, hola JSConf. And so you could see how you could use these together to implement something like a bold command in an editor, in a text editor. And so I mentioned we're using Browserify. Hopefully you're familiar with that, and that allows us to use the common JS code. And it also has transforms and things like that, which I'm not a huge fan of, but I do like compile to languages and using them with Browserify. I just like to compile ahead of time, that's all. So it's in Browserify. Other bundlers might work, component or require.js and things like that, but not really our biggest priority at the moment. And there's a wizard. So as our convention, we try to pick a name that is available on NPM. So that's one of the first steps, is picking out the name. So this helps users find the repository, which happens quite a lot, it seems. NPM, I wish, would enforce the repository field more than it currently does, but so as a result, you end up wondering where the hell the repository is. And so at this point in the NPM registry, I mean, there's a lot of modules on there now. I mean, I couldn't even give an accurate number, but in the tens of thousands, I'm pretty sure. And a lot of the good names are taken, or a lot of the single word names are taken, I should say. And so as a result, almost all of our web modules, I think with the exception of one, is hyphenated. We had to figure out a name that uses 2 words, basically. But this ends up working out decently because we get a nice noun-verb convention. And so there's a little bit of consistency there. So GitHub, wrap range, and then NPM, same name. Everybody's happy. So hopefully this goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. Always add the README file. If you're looking through the modules in the organization right now, you might be like, hey, but this one doesn't have a README. And so yes, that's one of the guidelines we're still trying to get fully compliant with. It'd be good to have the NPM installation instructions, which, I mean, if you're following the convention, it should just be the same as the repository name, but it's always good to have it in the README as well. A usage example is always good, too. Just like a little quick showing of how the API works. And I mean, honestly, if the module is as simple and focused as it should be, it's like a quick example, it should be all that's really needed, right? But nonetheless, sometimes you might also want to generate API docs using JS doc comments inline or something like that. We find that the docs, DOX command line tool, it's in NPM also, from TJ Hollowaychuk, does a pretty decent job of that. But more importantly, we like to have the README because we can add the Travis CI and Sauce Labs build badges, and we can see a granular output of which browsers are failing, if any. And also, Travis just gives a basic overall, everyone passed or everyone failed, but it's good to have that in there too. So that brings us on to the cloud testing. We use a command line tool called Zool, which combines Browserify, Mocha, Travis CI, the service, and Sauce Labs. So it's kind of a hodgepodge, but in the end, you get to execute your browser tests using Browserify in the cloud, using arbitrary web browsers. And in the package.json file, the npm test command will be set up to execute Zool. And there's the repository for it, if you want to check that out. If you don't get the reference, there is no Dana, only Zool. Ghostbusters. So Travis CI is a part of the equation here. Travis CI ends up invoking Sauce Labs when you set up your commit hooks like that. And so you need to enable that from GitHub for each repository. A little bit of a pain, but there could be more annoyances. The Zool wiki has a good page on explaining how to set up Travis CI. But it basically involves creating a Sauce Labs account and Travis has a way of encrypting environment variables, so you can encrypt your username and your authentication key, and then it knows which repository you're accessing. So there's an example of what Travis CI's matrix would look like. It's a little blurry, but we're specifying browser name, browser version, and a matrix style, and a couple tests are failing there, so we'd want to go in there and clean that up, right? So you'll need to create a Sauce Labs account. There's free ones. They're called open sauce. And you can basically create as many of those as you want. So Zool integrates with Sauce Labs, like I said, by checking the environment variable. And so somewhat annoying, but you have to create a new Sauce Labs account for every module created. I'm going to have to ping their support on that pretty soon or something, but it's a little annoying. My one password looks like this by now. So it's kind of ridiculous. Hopefully they'll make that process easier soon. So then, of course, hopefully in the end, you get nice all greens. And then you're like, OK, my module is stable, and I can use it in the application now. If not, then you would be able to go to Travis CI and see the output, see exactly what errors were thrown, and then hopefully you can figure it out from there. Internet Explorer gives really terrible errors, so usually it requires a little bit more digging. But then you commit something else, try to fix it, and hope for greens again, right? So please check out the organization, check out the code, send patches, and hopefully some of these ideals rub off on you. And thank you for listening.